are now listening to an inspirational message from the Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where Dr. Michael Wesley Sr. is pastor. Please join the service in progress.
Amen. As our journey continues in Genesis, as we have been walking through this first book of the Bible, we are now in the 39th chapter. We had hoped to move forward from there, but it's so pregnant with possibilities, so God continues feeding us from there. So Genesis 39, 13 through 20 in your hearing, and these words pick up the story. And it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, See, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to the words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. This is the word of God for the people of God. I want to preach today from this subject. It's a bad, bad, bad world. It's a bad world that we live in. It's beautiful, it's colorful, it's exciting, it's well populated with people, but it's filled with issues of injustice. And the truth is, when you get caught by an unjust action in life, it really can cause a serious set of embitterness to deepen in our hearts. And it requires God to do some work on us. It requires God to change our focus and our perspective in order to see things differently, in order to keep from falling into the state of ruin. It's so easy. It is so easy to give up. It is so easy to give in. It's so easy to feel, what's the use when things are going against us? But when God opens our eyes and helps us to see what he's doing in the process, that changes everything. You need a game changer. You need something to change what appears to be, to allow a greater insight to develop. Now here in our text today, we find our friend Joseph in an ugly situation. He's in prison. Prison is a difficult circumstance. And I don't want to hurt anybody, not trying to put anybody on the spot or anything, but the prison system in America has not always been what it is. It really emerged to the penitentiary system and all of the serious kinds of incarceration until later. There's always been some form of confinement. As I think about it, I think back on some of my travels, particularly when I traveled to West Africa, to Ghana. And when I was in Ghana, I had the privilege, after preaching there, the revival that I was there to preach, and participating in the medical clinic that I was there for, a medical mission, we got a chance to do a little touring. And one of the places we went to was a slave castle called El Nina. And in El Nina, it was the original Portuguese slave castle that was later taken over by the Dutch. One of the largest in Africa. It originally was designed to be a quarters when the trade of ivory and gold and all of that went on. But when human trafficking became an issue, the bottom floors that had been used for gathering in gold and ivory and some of the other commodities were turned into a dungeon to hold slaves. The slaves were divided into two kinds of quarters. There was a quarters for the female slaves, and there was a quarter for the male slaves. The female slaves were often put near the open court, so that when the governor of the palace decided that he wanted someone to make sport of, he could look out and he could choose who he wanted. And even though the women had not been bathed or had not had opportunities to use the restrooms in humane circumstances, and even when their cycle was there was no opportunity for refreshment or anything like that, the master would call them up. And often those who would refuse to come up, there was two cannonballs that were there in the middle of that court, and along the walls were chains and shackles, and persons who refused to cooperate were often shackled to those chains and those cannonballs. And they were made to stand in the sun or stand in the weather or whatever it may be as punishment for refusing to cooperate. But along the other side of El Mino's slave castle were the male dungeons. The dungeons where 600 men would be incarcerated. And along those walls were places where shackles were when men were often rebellious. And they would keep them there in chains until the ships bound for a new world picked them up. I remember distinctly as I walked through, smelling even today, the stench of human remains and the processes where people were treated in inhumane circumstances. And then there was finally a small portal. Those rooms were small. The African was tall and often would be made to bend to go through those doors. And finally there was a door called the point of no return. And when men would enter into the point of no return, they would be thrust into the Atlantic Ocean and then across into the New World. Prison was bad. I don't know what Joseph was thinking about the condition of the prison that he was put in. Perhaps he wasn't thinking so much about the condition of the prison at all. Maybe he was familiar with what the circumstances would be and was already familiar with the inhumane treatment of persons who had been so incarcerated. But I'll tell you what I do think he was thinking about. Not so much his condition, but the injustice that he had experienced. If you were here last week, you would know that we said that Joseph had been Potiphar's servant for 11 years. God's hand had been upon the young man, 17 years old, when he was sold into slavery and brought down into Egypt as a common slave and placed in the slave quarters. But God's hand was upon him. And soon he was elevated to visiting and living in the household of Potiphar. And later he was elevated to becoming Potiphar's personal servant. And then he was made master of Potiphar's entire estate. Young tenderoni, strong, good-looking boy. The son of Rachel and Jacob. Well-built, walking around in the house full of integrity. Miss Potiphar had her eyes fixed on this young tenderoni. And eventually, in a brazen voice, she approached him. And day after day, she approached him, but he refused her. And on this particular occasion, she arranged that the house would be empty of all of the rest of the house servants. And Joseph came in and she again said, "Joseph, lie with me." And Joseph refused. He did one of those spin moves and broke loose. And when he broke loose, his tearaway jersey, should I say, was left in her hand. And she said, "Oh, I got him now, man. It's amazing when a woman's love turned into a woman's scorn." I know that nobody here knows anything about that. If you know what I'm talking about, just blink your eye. Don't raise your hand. I mean, she loved him, but then she hated him, and she loved him, and she hated him. And she was so angry with him that she had to do him again. And so she realized she had his garment in her hand, and she called the house servants together. She said, come here, come here, come here. She said, look at this, what this Hebrew has done. This Hebrew has come in to mock us. He wanted to lie with me, but when he heard my screams, he ran, and I have this garment. And then she laid up and waited till her husband came home. Potiphar, that Hebrew slave that you brought, he tried to get to me, and I screamed, and when I screamed, he ran, and here he comes. Oh, man. And Potiphar heard the words, and he took Joseph and he put him in prison. So Joseph wasn't concerned about whether or not he was in a dungeon or whether or not he was in chains. The boy's heart was broken, perhaps, because he realized that he invariably, unmistakably, unjustly was mistreated. And when that kind of activity takes place in the heart of a human being, it can do some chilling damage. And so here he is, he's thinking to himself, first and foremost, probably the injustice that was done to him by Potiphar himself. Potiphar, his master. If there was ever anybody who should have been defending him, it should have been Potiphar. Potiphar's house, his fields, and everything else had been blessed because Joseph had been there. For 11 years he had managed, and he had the Midas touch, and everything he touched turned to gold, and Potiphar's household flourished. And now in a moment when it seems that Joseph needed him the most, Potiphar turned against him, put him in prison. Well, you know what I really think? I really do think that Potiphar has to take some blame here. I really think that he has to take some blame because, number one, he at least should have investigated the matter. I mean, this boy had been his servant. He knows what kind of character he has. He knows what kind of person he is. He should have investigated the situation. And if not, he at least should have handled things perhaps differently. Investigate it. Check out the facts. If the boy was guilty, then punish him, yes. But if the truth come to light that he was innocent, then restore him. Restore him to his position, or at least to another place of honor. But Potiphar doesn't. And you know what I believe? I believe that when the accusations were brought forth, that Potiphar really had some suspicions. You know how they say, there's that sarcasm saying today that the husband or the wife is the last to know. Is that really the truth? Potiphar knew Miss Potiphar. If he had really believed her accusations, he would have probably tortured Joseph and had him slowly put to death. But because he really understood, I find it significant when I read the text that all of the servants, all of the slaves, the other slaves, when she makes this accusation against Joseph, they say nothing. They say nothing because they knew Miss Potiphar. They knew that she had been an immoral woman, and this probably was not her first rodeo. And certainly she had had other lovers, and perhaps she had even had a couple slaves or two. That was not uncommon. I'm telling you, if the masters, the governors would look down on the slave quarters and choose girls who hadn't bathed, Miss Potiphar was picking on a tenderoni who walking around in muscle shirt. So the slaves all knew Miss Potiphar, and they probably whispering, and probably because they knew and because they had been talking, word had gotten out, and I'm sure a kind of fellow that Potiphar was, captain of the guard of the prison, he knew too. At least had some suspicion, but still, if you're Joseph there, you got to believe that Joseph is sitting in prison thinking, I can't believe Potiphar. I can't believe his lying wife. I can't believe that I'm in prison because of her. And then what he didn't do. And then I think that Joseph has another problem. I think not only is he thinking injustice that he feels in his heart toward the way his master has treated him and his master's wife, but now I think here's where the danger comes. I think that it's possible that maybe, and you, God, you're sovereign, you rule, you're in charge of everything. How did you allow this to happen to me? Come on now, don't pretend. I know you're holy. I know you're in here and the day is Sunday, but don't pretend like you've never accused God. You've been praying, you've been looking, you've been trying to get out of circumstances, situations. Things have turned against you. It has looked ugly, and you know that God has all power in heaven and earth in his hand, and somehow or another, it's easy to feel as if God has not done what he could have done to deliver you. And then Joseph probably thought to himself, well, what's the use? Why be good? Why be moral? Why be upright when it seemed like other people who are not trying to do right get away? Isn't that how we feel sometimes? You look around and you see everybody else. You trying to do the right thing. You trying to do it right. You're trying to go about it straight. You're trying to love. You're trying to keep. You're trying to do. And you look around you and you see everybody else gaming. And it's so easy to come under conviction. Why then should I be the one? When it seems like in this dog-eat-dog world, this very bad world, that right is forever on the throne, on the cross, and wrong is forever on the throne. And it seemed like, why should I? But here's what I came by to tell you today. That Joseph understood something that I wish you understood. See, we all can identify with how Joseph surely must have felt, because we live in an unjust society. And we've seen injustice time and time again, not just in the courts, but we've seen it in small ways in our own lives. And we can understand how easily we can grow bitter toward other people when we have been the victim of injustice. But here's what I want you to know. I want you to know what Joseph knew. Joseph knew at least three things, and I'm going to drop these in your lap and have a seat. Joseph knew. Joseph knew the secret to victory. He knew not just what he felt, but what did he know? See, when you know that you know that you know, it goes down in your heart. And it helps you to stand in the face of a wind and not flinch. When you know what you know, you can hold your head up regardless of what they say. When you know what you know, you can let the hellhounds bark. When you know what you know. Joseph knew. What did he know? Joseph knew. Joseph knew that persecution, God uses persecution to prove that we are his children. God. Sometimes we think that persecution proves that God is not with us. When people are on our trail and they're mistreating us and things like that, we look around and we say, God, where are you? You must not be with me. But that's not the truth. The truth is, when you go through what you go through, you understand that you're God's man or God's woman in that place. Because if the devil already had you, why would he need to pick at you? He doesn't pick at people he already has. When you're already in chains, why put you in chains? But because you're free and because you're his child. Listen, Jesus talked about that kind of thing. Jesus said when he got those boys together in his day on the mount called the mount there in Galilee, overlooking the Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. I've been there, stood on that mountaintop. And Jesus told those fellas, he said, listen, blessed are the meek in the heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Then he gets down in that verse, down a little bit further, and he said, blessed are you when men shall persecute you and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely He said, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. In other words, the world is not going to like you. The world didn't like me. And when the world come against you, you need to understand that it's just proof that you are my child. See, that's what we need. We need God to transform our eyes, to open our eyes to see that he's not against us, that when circumstances align themselves and come against us in that way, it's not God that's against us. It's that God is proving us, anchoring our feet to let us know whose we are and that we belong to him. Joseph knew that this was going to be the secret to his victory. What else? What else do you think Joseph could have known? I think that Joseph probably knew, I suspect it anyway, that he knew that God uses persecution to mold character. See, you don't get to be fine without going through something. Huh? A diamond is not polished without friction. And a man is not perfected without pain. You have to go through something to become somebody. Oh, you have to go through trial and tribulation and difficulty. And it's in the midst of going through that you become. Huh? Simon Peter, you know Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' followers, one of the 12. He was a lion cussing, fighting fisherman from Galilee. But once Jesus got a hold of his heart and converted him, after he became the preacher at Pentecost, later when he was writing to the people of the diaspora, the people of his day, he said, listen, don't you think it's strange when you come under fiery persecution? Don't you know that the testing of your faith is what makes you who God wants you to be? I like the old song, be patient with me, God is not through with me yet. For when God gets through with me, I shall come forth as pure gold. But sometimes God has to put us in the fire. They do it. They do it with iron. They take Birmingham, was known for all of its natural resources. Red Mountain is full of iron ore. And one of the reasons Birmingham became known as the little Pittsburgh of the South, because of the natural resources that were embedded in the mountains. And they could take that natural iron ore and they could heat it, put it in blast furnaces and all those things like that. And the dross would be separated and they could scrape the dross off. And the pure metal would come forth out of the fire. Oh, I wish somebody would. But you need to get your head up. You may be crying, but there's a reason you're crying. God is working something in you. Come on, don't you look to the left, look to the right, look to the hills from whence cometh your help, knowing that your help come from the Lord which made heaven and earth. And I know it may look bad right now. And somebody said, weeping may endure for a night, but there's another side of this thing. Joy comes in the morning. Oh, God is our refuge and strength, a present help in our trouble. Oh, he knows what is necessary to bring us through. Listen, no cup would want to go through the fire. But in order for it to be the beautiful vessel that it is, it has to be painted. And it has to be put in a kiln. And the heat has to be applied to it. And it has to bake. But when it comes out, it's ready for service. And I just want you to know, Joseph understood that. Listen to what Joseph probably did. He probably ran his resume in his own mind. He said, listen, I've always tried to do right. When I was a boy in Canaan, the son of my father, Jacob, he elevated me because I wanted to do what was right. Gave me a coat of many colors because I wanted to do right. Everybody didn't like it. Not even my brothers liked it. But I wasn't going to behave because they were misbehaving. I wasn't going to act like they did. I was going to do what my father told me to do. And on one occasion when he sent me to find them, I put myself out. I went to Shechem looking for them. I didn't find them. I went a little further to Dothan. I went everywhere I could to find my brothers because I wanted to do right according to my father. Then they wrapped me up, put me on a camel, took me down here as a common slave, put me in a slave quarter, maybe put chains on my neck and fetters on my feet. But God was with me. And because God was with me in the slave house, Potiphar had to recognize the good hand of the Lord was upon me. And he took me out of the prison dungeon and he brought me into his house. And God's hand was on me in the house. And he made me overseer. And if God was good to me in that circumstance, God can be with me right now. Sometimes all you have to do is look back. And if you look back and if you think, you can't help but think. If you look back and think from where I've come from, man, I lift my hands and say, Lord, sometimes God put us in circumstances. And that's what I want to say to you in the third expression here. Joseph not only must have understood that God uses persecution to prove that he was God's man. Not only did he perhaps use persecution to show him that he was developing his character through his personal suffering, but I think Joseph understood that persecution gives him a chance to show God's supernatural strength and the joy that can be on the inside of a person who's going through it. Oh man, nobody likes it when trouble knocks on your door. Nobody readily raised their hand and said, persecute me. Nobody willingly enrolls in the school of suffering. But when you do, at least know what Joseph knows. When they have enrolled your name and you didn't sign up for it. When they put your name on the scandal board. And you know they will. Social media today is awesome. Before you know it, you're on somebody's Facebook page. Before you know it, you're on somebody's Instagram. Come on, talk to me. Before you know it, you're on somebody's text or tweet, or you're the subject of somebody else's scorn. And don't you worry, I know you didn't sign up for it, but don't let that knock you out the box. Let that help you to understand that God has allowed it so that he could show you just how bad he is. Anybody ever gone through something God had to show up? Anybody ever suffered something, somebody looked like they had their hands on you? Looked like...
Hope you enjoyed the broadcast. You have been listening to a message from the Greater Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, where we are reaching the world for Christ, located at 2135 Jefferson Avenue Southwest, Birmingham, Alabama 35211. For a copy of a CD or DVD, you can reach us at 205-925-5972 or visit us on the web at www.greatershallow.org. For an uplifting message, please join us for the next broadcast.